Well, thank you, Thurman. Good afternoon, everybody. Great to be here. I want to say how much I appreciate being back here at the Clinton School. I was here a few years ago, and I'm just delighted to have the opportunity to be back and to have a chance to talk to you about something a little different than what I talked about last time I was here, which is this book that I've just put out. I want to say thank you to the Clinton School and the organizers of the speaker series for giving me the opportunity to be here with you today. You know, as you might imagine, I do an awful lot of speaking engagements in my role as the head of a large national foundation and as someone who's just put out this book. And, you know, I've been on the road a lot lately, and while this work is obviously rewarding, it can also be a little bit draining. But I have to say, I've just been here for a little while, and I've concluded that there's absolutely nothing draining about this visit. I'm really thrilled and excited to be here because places like this, and yes, people like Thurman and all of you are genuine sources of hope and inspiration for all of me. You see, much of what I have to say is designed to draw attention to what's wrong, right? To frame problems, to explain things that need to change or issues that have to be addressed. But I think this school and all of you help me have a different perspective, help to alter that view. That's because what's going on here in Little Rock is all about solutions, not as much as about the problems. And every one of you is working to be part of the solution. I can see that very clearly. It energizes me. Just had a terrific conversation a few minutes ago with some wonderful students who I learned a lot from. So thank you. I really hope that I can return some of that energy this afternoon and give you some new perspective of your own. Specifically, that one new perspective I want to offer today is a new way to think about this idea of talent. And I've thought a lot about that concept lately. You know, I wrote the book on it, or at least I wrote a book on it. My book is called America Needs Talent, and it draws on some of the lessons that I've learned from working for nearly 3 decades at this confluence of higher education, public policy, and philanthropy. I think some of the ideas in this book can be helpful to anyone in public service, and so if you'll indulge me, I'd like to explore some of those ideas, beginning with this fundamental idea that talent is the key to national and individual success. In fact, if you think about it, talent, that is human capital and capacity, has always been central to our prosperity and progress as a nation. To fully understand this, I think it's important to recognize where we were as a nation in the 20th century and really what's different about that today. In many ways, the 20th century defined who we are as a nation for ourselves and for the world. Now, this picture here is an example of pre-World War II America. It's about 75 years ago, circa 1939. And if you look very carefully at that guy sitting on the roof with the mandolin in his hands, you might notice that he looks a little bit like me. That's my dad. So in this picture, he's 17 years old, somewhere in rural New Hampshire. My dad's parents immigrated to the U.S. from Greece just a few years before he was born. But by the time of this photo, he had dropped out of high school to support his family. His father wasn't able to find work during the Depression, so my dad used his great skill as a guitar and a mandolin player, developed beginning actually when he was 7 years old, to help the family survive, literally survive. A few years later, he was drafted. He was shot down in the European theater, served 17 months as a prisoner of war, and returned home in 1945 to eventually settle into a working-class career. My parents, my brothers and I, and my grandmother all lived in a 2-bedroom house in a working-class community outside of Hartford, Connecticut. You know, the truth is, we never fully made it to the middle class, but we survived. And with the combined efforts of both parents, my dad using his affable, ethical, and infectious personality as a salesman, my mother as a focused, productive clerical staff member in the local police department, we were able to make it through. My parents were driven by the idea that all of their sons had to go to college, and they saved every penny to make that possible. And though it wasn't nearly enough, frankly, I received financial aid from just about every government, institutional, and church program I could find. My brothers and I all ended up making it through, doing reasonably well, and hopefully doing some good in the world. Millions of families like mine made it in the 20th century. We were the products of an era defined by a combination of values and opportunities. an American era known for its can-do spirit. For proof of that, just look at what this nation accomplished in the 20th century. During that time period, which Life magazine publisher Henry Luce famously called the American century, we were driven by a unifying belief in the very idea of America, where hard work and self-determination reap rewards. It was the American century because we believed, because we had the American people, and they had the talent that made us the world's leader in just about everything. Think about what was accomplished in that century. We cured polio. We reached the moon and won the Cold War. We even created the internet. How did we do it? Talent. But it's worth considering here in the early parts of the 21st century, do we still have what it takes? Do we still believe? Can we muster the talent to do it all again? Well, I certainly believe that we can, but we can't do it the same way that we did back then. The landscape has just changed too dramatically. Global competition has soared. Some 2 million jobs are unfilled right now, lacking qualified candidates in the American economy. 3/4 of CEOs say finding qualified people is a major concern, and 2/3 of all jobs being created right now require some form of post-high school education or training. In short, that recipe for 21st century success is far more complex, and the need for talent, all kinds of talent, is greater than ever. Now, you might be thinking at this point, he's just used the word talent several times, but I'm not exactly sure what he means when he says talent. Well, let me tell you what I mean by talent. And in the book I say, talent is what happens when knowledge, skills, and abilities are honed by things like education and experience in ways that benefit both the individual and society at large. The point is, talent is much more than innate ability. It's knowledge of particular domains and the human context that give it meaning. Just as our society has evolved, so must our view of talent and our means for developing it. That means thoughtful, deliberate choices have to be made by government, by the private sector, by education and individuals to grow talent in America. Well, in the book, I lay out these 5 ways here that we can get to this more talented society. These are, in short, to redesign higher education so that it serves students and society's needs, to unleash private sector innovation to encourage risk-taking and create a more solid talent ROI, to create a new entity that consolidates rather than expands federal education, workforce development, and talent recruitment functions into a new U.S. Department of Talent, to reimagine the government's role in talent development and deployment, to develop and implement skills-based immigration policies to attract and develop a more talented workforce, and to recognize and revitalize cities as hubs of innovation and commerce that actually attract and cultivate talent. Well, so that I'm not standing up here talking at you for very long, I want to briefly highlight each one of these ideas, and then we can certainly come back to them in more detail following my comments. Well, let's begin with one way that we can boost the nation's talent quotient, and that is to take a new approach to higher education. You know, today's higher education system has served us well in the past, but frankly, it simply can't produce the talent that we need going forward. Far from it. Today's post-secondary system is unfortunately too unaffordable for too many of our fellow citizens, especially those in the growing populations of students who at one time we used to call non-traditional, but are fast becoming the norm. Those who are non-white or first generation, who attend part-time, who work, and who have children. The system also doesn't produce enough graduates. Think about that 60% goal that Lumina Foundation has. We're at only around 40% if you count degrees, and about 45% if you count degrees and post-secondary credentials that are not degrees, far from that 60% goal. And it also doesn't give us graduates who necessarily have the knowledge, skills, and ability that will ensure their long-term career success. So to address these issues and to maximize talent development, we have to redesign the system so that it better serves today's students and meets society's needs. In short, we need a higher education system that's affordable, that's student-centered, and that's relentlessly focused on quality. Quality is defined by the actual learning that students obtain, not merely the time that they spend in classrooms accumulating college course credits. Government certainly plays a big role in this because it's so dominant in the student financing equation, and post-secondary providers play a key role as well, not just traditional colleges and universities, which are going to be continue to be very important for the foreseeable future, but the full range of education providers, from companies to unions to the military, even museums and libraries, all should be considered part of this redesigned system. We can also boost the nation's talent quotient by rethinking our entire immigration model. Immigration is a core part of the American success story. After all, we're a nation of immigrants, built on and constantly renewed by the energy and the innovation of a diverse population. The immigrants of the last century, they arrived on these shores with energy and guts, but often little in the way of cultivated talent or advanced education. Despite this, through hard work and an entrepreneurial spirit, they carved out a place, and in the process, they dramatically improved the American landscape. But the 21st century is a far different ballgame. God-given talent like my dad's, grit and hard work, they still matter, of course, but they are not enough. It's worth asking, how would our immigrant grandparents and parents have fared today? Without the proper training, I fear likely not very well. So our immigration debate shouldn't be about who we want within our borders or where they come from. It should focus on what type of a society we want and how we recruit the talent to help construct it. Rather than focusing on the problems associated with immigration, like border security, our policy needs to be more focused squarely at meeting the nation's talent needs. You can help in this regard by using your vantage points to press for new approaches to immigration, like the deliberate skills-based models that have actually worked in places like Australia and Canada, complemented by improved education and training policies to educate the immigrants who are already here. By focusing on what our nation needs in terms of talent, we have the ability to actually meet the entire continuum of talent needs, from low to middle to high end. We also need to unleash private sector innovation to solve the talent deficit. While government plays a critical role in issues like education and immigration, the private sector, frankly, has an enormous opportunity to stand shoulder to shoulder with government, with others, to actually create the change needed. We need to apply the risk-taking capacities of foundations and businesses, and we need to harness a small portion of the trillions of dollars that capital markets manage to this challenge. Innovation thrives when education and employment are tightly intertwined and when both are focused on the real-world needs of citizens. So we need to help these private sector players do more and better by giving them the tools that they need to be more consciously focused on talent development and talent deployment. What's required, I think, is a combination of strategies that will foster talent development at scale, with innovative programs like the Starbucks College Achievement Plan, which helps workers get the next level of talent development they need to succeed, even if they don't stay at Starbucks as an employee. And we should think outside the box by promoting the creation of new, innovative organizations like B corporations that employ the best practices of for-profit companies without making profit the primary motive. Imagine using the power of a whole new cadre of B Corps aimed at talent development and recruitment, expanding the number and quality of the high-quality providers that are actually available. And we should also develop new financing mechanisms, like social innovation bonds, to fund specific talent outcomes. In the places where you live and work, this combination of strategies could produce a significant talent dividend. Now, much of this is relatively untested, to be sure, but these new ways of unleashing private sector innovation to increase American talent are surely worth exploring. And these private sector efforts could be augmented by action in the public sector, specifically by the creation of this new U.S. Department of Talent. Now, I'm like an empath. I think I may be reading your minds right now. You're thinking, right, what we need is more federal bureaucracy. Okay, let me explain my idea, and then we can talk about it during the Q&A. So right now, we have a labor department that's focused on workforce preparation. We have an education department that aims to foster educational excellence and ensure equal access, and other agencies, like the Department of Homeland Security's Citizenship and Immigration Service, that focus on talent recruitment. Shouldn't there be better coordination and collaboration among these entities? My proposal is to repurpose 3 different government agencies into one, a new U.S. Department of Talent that puts talent development at the center of our federal workforce education and recruitment policies. A U.S. Department of Talent could greatly improve efficiency and focus. Think about an agency that could develop and implement strategies for linking standards-driven K-12 education and higher education with high-quality, locally managed workforce development programs and with highly focused global recruitment strategies. This kind of interconnected approach would surely help us as we seek to close the nation's workforce gaps and enrich our cultural and social well-being. A U.S. Department of Talent would link efforts that have long been disconnected and bureaucratically entrenched, replacing them with approaches that focus on actual outcomes. Such an agency, one that puts talent at the center of the federal workforce education and recruitment policies, would send a powerful message to our citizens, to employers, and to our global partners and competitors. It would show that the federal government is actually serious and strategic about its role in developing, harnessing, and deploying talent. Another key way that we can upgrade our talent development efforts is to tap into the tremendous potential of our nation's cities and urban areas. I believe we need to see cities not as challenges to be solved, not as educational and social problems to be fixed, but as hubs of talent, places where innovation and creativity truly thrive. Coordinated action is needed across all sectors, public, private, and civic. Communities that are succeeding in this talent hub concept are finding that cultivating talent, in addition to attracting it, is the most successful strategy. Now, attracting talent from other communities is certainly viable. Think about places like Austin and Denver. They've done a good job using their natural or other resources to draw people to those communities. But frankly, talent attraction also has costs associated with it. One is that it can be a zero-sum game. One city's gain is another city's loss. That really doesn't help our overall talent challenge as a nation. And another important cost of talent attraction without talent cultivation of the people who are there is social inequity. Because in too many of these communities, the locals, who are often low income and minority, they're often left behind in the urban renaissance that attracts those newcomers. Cities that are succeeding in this task are deliberate and collaborative. One city that's making progress on this task is almost exactly the same size as Little Rock, Grand Rapids, Michigan, which I profile in the book. In Grand Rapids, they set goals. They listen to what employers need. They foster a deep sense of place. They offer multiple pathways to success for all types of people. And the various sectors in the community work together, harmoniously, driven by the idea that all residents can actually thrive. Independent third-party agencies often do well as the organizers of these kinds of approaches. They serve as conveners, as active participants in these strategies, producing and leading different strategies for developing talent and providing high-quality information and ideas that can bend the arc of progress in communities that are working to cultivate and deploy the talent that's there. You know, in a sense, these urban talent hubs make good on many of the ideas that I discuss in other elements of the book related to developing talent. Talent hub cities collaborate to take advantage of the educational resources at their disposal, focusing them on what individuals need to be successful in the community. They use the ingenuity and the drive of the private sector, combined with smart public policies, to create a higher level of success. And they recognize that talent comes from many places, including from other countries, in ways that amplify and complement the talent that's already in place. In cities, much like America itself, talent defines what a city is and where it's going. So what can we expect to achieve if we successfully implement these ideas? Well, I think we can imagine a nation very different from the one that we now have. In the second American century, we can be a much more equitable society, one in which employers fully recognize and realize the value of a diverse talent pool, and where policymakers use education strategies and social innovation efforts to broaden opportunities and boost success for all Americans. National prosperity will no longer be defined merely by the size of our economy, but by an increasingly innovative private sector driven to meet America's social as well as economic objectives. These are the things that are possible in the second American century when America has the talent that it needs to be prosperous. But the path to get us there is surely quite different from the one that we followed in the 20th century. So this takes me back to where I started, to the 20th century, when my father was in his late teens and America was a very different place. In the years that followed, my dad and mom worked hard, they made their own way, and they created opportunities for themselves and for their children. Today, thanks in large part to their insistence on education, to the idea that we actually needed to advance our own knowledge, skills, and abilities in very concrete and deliberate ways, those children, my brothers and I, are successful adults. But our path to success wasn't the same one as our parents took. And the path that my kids will need to take in the coming years, along with your own children and grandchildren, that path will have to be different from mine, profoundly different, in fact. I believe now is the time to start clearing that new path to build a new system designed specifically to foster talent in America. With such a system in place, we can usher in yet another American century, one that belongs to them. Well, I believe in the power of storytelling, and today I've told you my story set in the context of my book. As community members, students, and faculty here at the Clinton School, each of you is writing your own story, of course, but there's a common thread that binds those individual stories together, and that's the desire to serve, to make this world better, and to improve the lives of others. I want to applaud you for that commitment, for developing your own talent and choosing to deploy it in ways that serve the greater good. I'm hoping that some of my comments today can help you in that admirable and very important work, and now I'm looking forward to your questions and comments. Thank you very much.
All right, we have time for some questions. Please raise your hands, and we'll get the microphone to you. Any questions? Yes, right here.
Hi, I'm Leandra from UALR, and I was very interested as someone who's working in higher ed to hear what you had to say about revamping higher education. In particular, I was inspired by your idea of, am I quoting this right, doing away with the credit hour.
Right.
And kind of the historical burden that the credit hour brings to us. I was wondering, do you have specific ideas about how we might make experience into credit?
Yeah, so let me start with the credit hour and then talk about what could come in its place. You know, the credit hour was never designed for what it now does. There's a long history of what the credit hour really was all about, which is it was originally designed primarily to figure out how to allocate pension money. That was one of the main reasons that it was created. It has now become, I call it the magic decoder ring. It's associated with everything that we do, from faculty compensation to determining student course load to virtually everything else, including allocation of resources to the institutions from various bodies like governments. So the credit hour has sort of outlived its usefulness, in my opinion, for the simple fact that it is a time-based measure. And in the modern world, in a modern democracy and economy, what we need out of our higher education system is not measures of time, but measures of outcome, of quality, of output, whatever you want to call it. To me, the key measure that we should be focusing on is learning. Learning is the most important outcome of the system. Well, we've learned a lot about how to measure learning in the last couple decades. Many people in higher education are doing extraordinary work in terms of measuring learning. This is not, back in the 60s and 70s, where we had great difficulty articulating the cognitive and non-cognitive things that we get out of learning. We've learned a lot over the course of that time period. So we're increasingly focused at Lumina Foundation around these ideas around competency-based learning, which is actually focusing more on what a degree or whatever the credential might be actually represents in terms of competencies. Now, these competencies are not necessarily things that have to do with specific task-oriented things. It has to do with the knowledge and the skills and the abilities and the values and the personality traits that I was talking about, but it's an expression of how you can actually apply those things. In other words, what you know and you're able to do is what a competency is. And then articulating the academic program around making sure that students possess all of those competencies. And so there are great examples now of competency-based learning initiatives. Western Governors University is one that's been around for a while, that's doing it at scale in 4 different academic areas at both the bachelor and master's degree level. But you now have a rapidly growing number of institutions. There's now something called a competency-based education network, where the University of Wisconsin System Online, Southern New Hampshire University, a growing number of other institutions are doing different types of this competency-based learning. I think there's a lot of opportunity here in Arkansas for this, by the way, that I think would be exciting to talk about. But the idea behind that is to actually define the competencies that should be present in whoever has that degree, and then figure out, do they already have some of those? Maybe they will have some of them because of their prior work or military or other experience. And then what do we actually need to do in the teaching and learning process to ensure that they actually have those competencies on the back end? The simplest way to think about this is it's turning the system on its head, right? So in the current system, time is the constant, that's what a credit hour is, and learning is the variable. Because in the current system, what's behind the 3 credit hours for the course is highly variable depending on the institution, the faculty member, the accreditor, all kinds of things. In the competency-based model, time is variable and learning is constant. That's the difference.
Yes, right here, Steve.
Hi, Xochitl Delgado. I'm a first-year student here at the Clinton School. What do you think the balance should be with business involvement in higher education? Because I think that it is good and we do need to have that involvement, but in Arkansas there's leaders in the business community who think that a liberal arts education is a waste of time, that they should not offer a philosophy degree. So how would that balance work?
Yeah, so I would say a couple things, Sochi. One is they're wrong, but they also should be more engaged. Now let me try to explain what I mean. I think part of the challenge here is that we have spent decades talking past one another in higher education and the employer world. And the best evidence of that is actually research evidence that we produced in the last couple of years in terms of polling with Gallup. So we polled business leaders, and we polled provost and senior academic leaders in colleges and universities. And one of the questions we asked is, are the colleges and universities adequately preparing students for today's modern workplace? 93% of the provost said yes, 14% of the employers said yes. There's a huge disconnect in terms of that. Now, what do we know about what the employers want? Well, what the employers want overwhelmingly, and they say this repeatedly in these different surveys, is they want people who are adaptable, who are critical thinkers, who are problem solvers, who are communicators. In other words, they want people who can actually adapt to the changing workplace, because what's happening in work is you don't go and work and do things in a sort of mechanical, repetitive way, the way you may have done in an industrial economy. You need to be a critical thinker. You need to be a diagnostician. You need to be a problem solver. Well, that's exactly what the liberal arts are designed to do. So this disconnect, I think, is pretty palpable. Now, the question is, what are we doing wrong in higher education that the employers need to better understand? And part of that, I think, has to do with the ways in which we are clear about what those generalizable skills are, the critical thinking, problem solving, et cetera, and how we're actually going about producing them. There, I think we should listen more to the employers. What is it that our students don't have that you're not getting, that you're not seeing as a result of what we're doing in our colleges and universities? So my view is every college degree, every credential should really have 2 things. It should have those generalizable knowledge, skills, and abilities that I mentioned, and it should have content knowledge. And it doesn't matter what you're in. It doesn't matter whether you're in graphic design or chemistry or English. You should be able to know about the subject matter and be able to demonstrate that you've got those generalizable competencies, those proficiencies, if you will. And to me, that's the important part about the conversation that needs to take place with employers. We've got to do a better job of actually helping them to meet their needs. When all is said and done, people go to college for 2 things, right? They go to college because they want to get a great job and they want to have a great life. That's why people go to college. Those are the 2 things, and you ask people over and over again, those are the 2 things that they want. And for higher education to say, well, we don't prepare people for jobs, is probably to the detriment of higher education. If people continue to say, as we did historically, we don't prepare people for jobs, we prepare them for life, they're making a mistake in my view, because in fact, they're one and the same thing. Because those same skills that are going to make you successful in life are going to make you successful at work. That's the point at which we've got to bring business and higher education closer together.
Right behind you.
Along those same lines, in several conversations over the last many months, the topics that you just talked about, these transferable skills, comes up many times,
Yeah.
and you know, part of that conversation turns into a discussion of short-term credentials to prepare someone for a job that's available today versus longer-term credentials that prepares them for any job in the future.
Right.
So it feels like we could easily tip the scales too far toward today
Yep.
versus the future. Can you talk a little bit about that balance?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, you know, again, this is one of these bifurcated discussions, right? So you end up saying, well, don't we need to prepare people short term for the sort of quote unquote middle skills jobs, or don't we need to prepare people for the longer term in the knowledge economy? The answer is both. All right, so we need both. And just to bring a little bit of data to the conversation, you know, one important thing to recognize here is that the lack of stackability, the lack of the ability of interoperability in the system, so that someone who gets to the first level, let's say it's a certificate or a certification in some specific area, who then wants to continue, has a lot of difficulty getting that prior learning recognized before they get to the next level. And then when they want to go from that level to the, you know, even someone who's transferring from a community college to a 4-year, we hear lots of stories still today in 2015 of tremendous problems in terms of the transfer of credit and other issues that take place. But the point is that the vast number of jobs in the American economy that are good jobs are still those jobs that are at the higher end. And to your point, the one statistic that I think has gotten a lot of attention here, because it's new in the last couple of months, is what came out of the Georgetown Center on Education and the Workforce. So they looked at the jobs that were created since the recession ended in late 2010 until earlier this year. So they looked at the American economy, and in that time period, 6.6 million jobs were created. Of the 6.6 million jobs that were created in the U.S. economy, they classified 2.9 million of them as good jobs. Well, what's a good job? A good job is one that pays median wage, which is $52,000, $53,000 a year, and that's in household income actually, and has health care or retirement or both in some cases. So that's a good job. Well, of the 2.9 million good jobs that were created, of the 6.6 million that were created, 2.8 million of them were held by people with bachelor's degrees. So that fact, I think, should be a wake-up call to us that, in fact, though there are jobs, and some of those jobs that I was talking about, they are pretty good jobs, right? They're paying $40,000, $45,000, $50,000 a year, but they're not at median wage. They are not the good jobs that most Americans really want to aspire to. For those jobs, you've got to keep going. You've got to get better. You've got to proceed in your career, and you probably need to get a bachelor's degree if you want to make it into that strata. And so there's lots of pushback to this idea. I've heard lots and lots about, you know, the fact that there's an awful lot of people who are unemployed and underemployed with bachelor's degrees. The data don't bear that out. The facts do not support that idea. People with bachelor's degrees have much lower unemployment rates than people with associate degrees, people with high school credentials or certifications or certificates. Those are just the facts. And so it is still the standard. On the other hand, we need to do a better job of helping people get to that first rung, that first post-secondary education or training rung, get them to that point, get them out of the jobs that are clearly declining in wage value, which are the jobs requiring a high school credential or less, because those are definitely declining in wage value, and actually move them along the pipeline so that they can get further and further along and actually get those good jobs and have that great job and great life that I think Americans aspire to. Yeah.
In the sense of the intersection of those 5. So I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about the opportunity for campus community partnerships, particularly around cities as talent hubs and higher education.
Yeah, thank you for noticing. That's the first time, I've now done this talk like 25 cities around the country. You're the first one who's asked that question, so that's good. I'm hoping you get something out of my book now. That's good. That was one of my points. there's a lot that can be done here. I mean, the common thread here across a lot of this is that our post-secondary learning institutions, whether they are colleges and universities or anything else, I point out in the book there are other ways we can be thinking about post-secondary learning, they're pretty critical. And I think the one word that's really important to me is collaboration. We have got to stop living in these stovepipes where we do urban planning and city development over here, and we do education over here, and we think about cultivation and attraction strategies over here, and we've got to bring these things together. And the best place to do that is colleges and universities and post-secondary learning institutions. They've got the people, they've got the capacity to actually convene people, so there's a lot of opportunity there for the colleges and universities to actually become part of this. In some cases, I mentioned in my remarks, an independent third-party entity is the better organizer for some of these conversations because they have less of a vested interest. And so in the case of the city work that I mentioned, like in Grand Rapids, there's a third-party entity there that is actually bringing the education, the civic, the social, the business leaders together and actually driving them towards the goal setting, holding their feet to the fire, keeping everybody aimed in the same way, et cetera. But the colleges and universities can play a big role because they have a lot of the people, the talent, that we're actually going to need in order to be able to keep these conversations going forward. So, yeah, it's a very important point, I think, that higher education is post-secondary learning is a thread that goes all the way through this, and our colleges and universities can play a big role as collaborators and conveners in that process.
I want to thank Jamie for being here and for coming back to the Clinton School. I note on his book, and our students will note this, the endorsement says this book should be on the desk of every 2016 presidential candidate. That quote was written by Anne Marie Slaughter, the president and CEO of New America, who was here last week, Jamie. So thank you very much for this enlightening talk. Come visit with him and get a copy of this book that every presidential candidate should read. Thank you.